Good morning. It's my pleasure to be in Uruguay and be part of your important event today. I'm going to provide some insight about our experience about establishing a research center for adaptation to climate change at the University of Alexandria. That's a night image taken by NASA of Egypt. That's the Nile Delta, and that's the Nile. So it's the inhabited area of Egypt is less than 5%. The remaining of it is desert. And that's one of the typical images that has been used a lot by IPCC and other institutions. And the Nile Delta is considered to be one of the most vulnerable areas to climate change. That's the Nile Delta area. The coastal area consists of 6 governorates, which is like provinces. We're talking about a population of 20 million just in these 6 provinces, projected to be 30 million by 2050 if current trends will continue, and up to 33 million by 2100. The Nile Delta is heavily populated. We're talking about 1,600 persons per square kilometer. That's the settlements and road networks in the area. The economic activities, we're talking about a major component of the Egyptian economy depending on the Nile Delta in terms of fishing activities, agriculture, industry, as well as we have here a mix of agriculture next to the urban centers, because most of the urban centers in the Nile Delta are actually situated within agricultural land, which means any transition would be at the expense of agricultural land. We have 3 coastal lakes in the area, which is about 25% of all the wetlands in the Mediterranean. They produce like 60% of the fish catch in Egypt. Why we started the center? There has been a lot of work concerning sea level rise and its impacts on the Nile Delta. The problem is most of that work has always focused on the physical impacts in terms of what are the areas that will be inundated. When they talked about people who will be affected, they were talking about the number of people actually living in this area at present. And the best option is, whenever an area will be inundated, we'll just resettle them somewhere else. So the socioeconomic aspects were not present. And it has been always like we're talking about hypothetical scenarios. What if we're talking about 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters? This means that there are gaps in terms of understanding what will be the impact of climate change and sea level rise from the Nile Delta. We need to focus on the socioeconomic vulnerabilities of these areas. We need to have projections for socioeconomic profiles in these areas. And no adaptation option is ever free. It's never 100% benefits. It always has externalities. has side effects. So we need to consider the trade-offs and the externalities, and also to consider the adaptation options in terms of how much it will cost. It's not just about the physical impacts. We're talking about different wetlands. We need to understand how the ecosystems in these areas will be affected. So, Alexandria Research Center for Adaptation to Climate Change is a project sponsored by the IDRC Canada. And the vision that we have is we need to have integrated climate change adaptation research. Climate change is not a unidiscipline, unisector issue. We're talking about multi-sector, cross-sectoral, and multidisciplinary aspects. We need to promote knowledge sharing about the work that has been done and about our experiences and so on. We always have a problem, at least in Egypt, that there is no interface between policy making and research. Researchers are typically interested in the topics they see of interest in their discipline, and also they would like to do their research, take their time until they are sure of the quality of the work, sure of the results that will come out, publish it, and then they are ready to give to the policy makers. That's the cycle for the research. But at the same time, we have to take into account that policy making has a cycle as well. You have windows to provide information, you have windows to influence decision making, but policymakers are not going to sit and wait until you are sure of what are you doing, and then they start taking it over and make use of it. And finally, it's about exchanging experience and best practices. A lot of work is going on globally on climate change and sea level rise. And when we talk about sea level rise, we're talking about deltas of rivers. And they have a lot of experience. That we shouldn't always start from scratch. We shouldn't assume that we are sort of unique in our context. Yeah, there are differences, but also there are similarities. So, in order to attain this vision, we considered a number of specific objectives. Is developing institutional capacities for research, and also to have a component on supporting capacities of researchers. Part of it is related to the provision of scholarships. Part of it is providing training to researchers, and also have support for visiting researchers from other institutions, nationally or internationally. At the same time, we're trying to focus on the interface between policymaker and research. So we are trying to create an enabling environment for that such an interface. That will provide research results, robust research results that can support the decision and policy maker. And finally, that's the overall that we're talking about for the center. What we've done so far, we have focused on capacity building activities for researchers, for different stakeholders, including government officials. We have conducted 22 workshops. We had more than 850 applicants, and we've trained more than 400 people. When considering the topics that we're talking about, you'll find that some of the work that we do actually is not related to climate change. Some of the training that we're providing. Because we know that the quality of the educational system in Egypt is not that good. So some of the basic research skills is not there. So you have to provide for that. So we're providing for the technical side of the story as well as the basic research skills. That's the affiliations of the people who attended training with us. We're talking about researchers in different universities, but also we're talking about NGOs, we're talking about ministries, and the WEWA, which is the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency. We also consider that no one place can claim that they are covering different issues of climate change. So what we thought about is, ARCA, which is our center, is to be a hub for research on climate change, which means that they have to have networks and researchers affiliated with the centers. So we have institutional networks. We signed MOUs with the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency. They have the Department for Climate Change with 2 Egyptian universities, and we also are undergoing contacts concerning affiliations with foreign research institutions. Right now, we have more than 500 researchers connected with us. In terms of research activities, we have adopted 4 modules for research, which is, the first is conducted by ARCA core team, small team of researchers working for ARCA, covering different topics, mostly related to socioeconomic aspects of climate change and sea level rise. And we have grad students, scholarships for grad students, working on different topics as well. Additionally, we have small research grants provided to researchers. And because of the interest of researchers in different disciplines in Egypt to working on climate change is very limited up until now. All the research grants that we're talking about here, the small research grants, the holders of those research grants have actually been participating in our training workshops. And we try to create some links with them as well as with other organizations. For example, we're talking about here marine biodiversity and sea level rise impact in the Mediterranean. We had a researcher from a Greek Institute for Marine Research, and she gave a workshop training. And one of the participants were from the Institute of Oceanography and Fisheries. We tried to create some links between them, and they came up with that idea. And actually, the researcher from the Greek Institute is supporting them in their research. We're not just hoping for this to end, and that would be the end of it. We're just hoping that it will flourish and they will start creating more contacts and doing more research on related topics. And also, we are asking some of the researchers affiliated with ARCA to assess the research gaps in terms of what are the vulnerabilities of Egypt to impacts of climate change on livestock. We found that there is no research on that topic, and that's why it became one of our research grants covered by the research grant scheme. And also working, we had some work on the impact of climate change and transmitted diseases. I'll try to be brief. I'll provide you with 2 examples of the work that we're doing. We did a research paper on the impact of inundation on the Nile Delta area. We worked on different scenarios. The figure we have here is sort cumulative. Part of it is actually the sea level rise, and part of it, because of land in the Nile Delta, is subsiding. So there's part of it is subsiding, and part of it is actual sea level rise. And we asked the question, okay, what if we don't have any sea level rise? Are we safe? Actually, we found that because of land substance, that some areas will be inundated even without sea level rise. In terms of the vulnerable areas, in terms of land use and land cover, large proportion of the areas that are vulnerable to inundation are cultivated land, and also we're talking about wetlands. The problem is, all the work that has been done so far is considering that wetlands will be part of the inundated areas. Actually, they are wetlands, so they are not going to be inundated. So what's going to happen is the system of these wetlands will change. What sort of change, what sort of impact on the wetlands ecosystem dynamics? That's part of one of the research grants that we are providing to some researchers to assess such an impact. An issue related to that is we have some man-made, some natural protection work. In here, we have sand dunes in some parts of the coastal area. The problem is some people and some government officials are mining this. So actually you have some natural protection and you are just getting rid of it, and at a certain point you start asking the question of how much will it cost to replace this. We also have protection work, mostly dikes and sea walls that were not intended for climate change and sea level rise, but for the erosion in some parts of the coastal areas. The second paper that I'm going to talk about is about the impact, another impact of sea level rise on the Nile Delta is saltwater intrusion into groundwater. That's the study area that we covered, which is the meta-governorate. That's the area we're talking about. This area is already affected to some extent by groundwater levels, high groundwater levels. This is the sort of impact we're talking about at present. That's how the situation would be in 2025. These areas, the orange areas, are the ones that will be affected by high levels of groundwater. That's in 2050, 2075, and 2100. Assessing the impact on crop yields, we found that the overall cumulative decline in yield due to saltwater intrusion would amount to about more than $900 million. One of the options that we considered as adaptation option, which is improving the efficiency of the drainage system and upgrading the pump stations of the drainage system. That would cost about $41 million, which means that it would cost less than 5% of that potential damage. In conclusion, To make a significant impact, you have to consider the policy and decision makers, make them understand that the concept of climate change is still rise. One of the problems that we have in Egypt is whenever someone will talk about sea level rise, they will talk about what will happen in 2100. So people are talking about it. That's a long, far in the future. So we shouldn't be concerned about that. So nobody's talking about the gradual change and the impact of that. Some of our work is demand-driven. So some of the research questions, instead of just answering questions that we have and try to communicate with policymakers, actually we'll try to take on some of the questions they have and try to provide them with the answers to that. There's a potential for cross-discipline, cross-institution collaboration, and more opportunities for employing bottom-up, top-bottom approaches. For the private sector, they should be involved more in the process of our work. That will create higher potentials for ownership and it's more locally based adaptation options. We always go for hard structures as adaptation options. That shouldn't be the case. That's the most expensive option. Right? And provide them with the opportunities for investment so they can take over. You need to sort of make more efforts in creating networks involving researchers and institutions in your work. That will provide a lot of impact, cross-sectoral and cross-disciplines.